Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of our Platform YA book clubs of 2021. Very exciting. I'm here with the amazing Jennifer Niven, who wrote the book club book for January, Breathless. Rounds of applause in the studio. Amazing. So we've got some people on the stream already. Hello to our old faces who have joined the book club a while ago, and anyone new who has come in. Let us know in the chat where you are joining from, because that's always really fun to figure out who the furthest person is away from both me and the author. So for those of you who are like, a book club? I didn't know you had a book club. Well, we have been doing this for a while, so very glad to have you on board finally. Basically, every single month we read a different YA book, and on the last Tuesday of the month, we have a live stream with the author where you get to ask them any questions you have. So there's different ways for you to get involved. One is watch the live stream, read the book. You're already halfway there because you're doing that. The second is using the hashtag Platform YA Book Club, which is in the title of this video, on social media to share your thoughts, ask questions, kind of find other people who are reading the book at the same time as you. And every month we are going to pick someone who has used the hashtag to win a bundle of YA books, which is very exciting. You can also join our Discord community. We have almost 400 people on there now, which is amazing. So the link to that's in the description. And also, if you are a bookish creator, if you have, a Bookstagram, a book talk, anything like that, and you talk about the books during the month, let us know. Like, send us a message on Twitter or on Instagram. Share your stuff with us. We'd love to share it around. So I am going to be asking Jennifer some of my questions and some of the questions you've already come up with. But if you have any questions during this stream, please leave them in the chat, because we have a lovely Harriet from Penguin who is going to be compiling them in a doc for me. So I will be periodically checking that doc and seeing if we have any questions that I can put to Jennifer as well. And the very last thing to say is, if you have not quite finished reading the book yet, do not worry, because this first section is going to be spoiler free. We are going to be keeping it nice and questions that aren't going to be giving away the ending of the book, because I know some of you might not have quite finished it yet. And then when we go into spoilers in the second section of the video, I will make that very clear. Do not worry, you will very much know that spoilers are coming, so you can pause it until you finish reading the book and then come back. So that is all the announcement things that we do at the beginning. Let's get to the questions. First question. It's an obvious one, but I feel like it's a good place to start with every author when we're talking about a book. Where did the inspiration for this story come? How did it come to you?
Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for tuning in, reading the book, everything. It just means more to me than you know. The inspiration really came, it's interesting, it came from two different points of my life. The first was, it's very personal to me as an 18-year-old. When I was Claude Henry's age, she is the main character in Breathless, and it's from her point of view. And the book is really about Claude finds out her parents are separating just before she graduates from high school. And it feels like the floor has just kind of disappeared beneath her feet for the first time in her life. And that summer, instead of spending it with her best friend and at home before she goes to college, she has to go to this island off the coast of Georgia with her mother. And she knows no one, she doesn't have cell service, and she meets a boy. And it's really about her beginning again and building that floor again beneath her feet. And for me, that is exactly what happened to me when I was 18, just before I graduated high school. My parents announced they were separating. I'm an only child. I was super close to them. And it was just a really painful summer, but it was also a really beautiful summer because I felt like I grew like leaps and bounds. And it was the first time I really had to figure out how to build a floor beneath my own 2 feet. And so that's where that came from. But then as I was working on the book and actually writing the book, I went to this island off the coast of Georgia, which is where it's set. And I met my now husband, and we had all of these adventures, which I gave to Claude and Jeremiah, the boy she meets on the island, and let them have in the book. So that part's very personal as well, in a much happier way.
Amazing. I'm going to take the first question from one of the readers, it's from Miran, who asks, as I understand it, the events and characters in Breathless closely resemble your own personal experiences with real people, which apparently it does. Was there ever a moment when writing where you felt the novel was too similar to real life? How do you draw the line between fiction and reality?
It's a great question, and thank you so much for asking it. It's, it's interesting because hopefully you're okay. With All the Bright Places, it was the first time I had written something really, truly personal. And that was my first experience with doing that. And I think the thing that I learned in that, and it's something I used in Breathless, is if I cast my characters, if I'm writing about someone who's similar to me or experiences that are really deeply personal, I find someone I can look at who's like in All the Bright Places, I cast Elle Fanning as Violet long before she ever played Violet in the film. And in this one, I cast Jeremiah, and I especially cast Claude, so that I can look at someone who looks very different from me, but who I can look at as the person, but it gives me just enough distance to write deeply personally, but also keep that objectivity I need to write the character, if that makes sense. I also, I do like playlists for my characters. So that helps me really get to know them better, but also just listening to those, it helps me think of them as characters as opposed to me, because if I start thinking of it as me, I will be not able to write and it'll be much too long. And so those things have really helped me.
God, kind of a question kind of linked to that. Pippin, someone who has, I'm pretty sure, been part of the book club since the very beginning. Hello again, Pippin. I was going to ask what inspired the story, but then I read the author's note and I realized. So what I wanted to ask instead is it more or less difficult writing about the things that are deeply personal to you as opposed to the bits that are entirely fiction?
I think there's a different sense of difficulty with both. I think that, with the ones that are deeply personal, it is hard to just open yourself up on the page, and it feels very vulnerable and you feel very naked, and it's not the most comfortable feeling in the world, especially if you're a private person. But it's also, you are drawing on your own experiences and things that in your soul and your heart. And with things that you're just inventing and pulling out of thin air, sometimes there's just inspiration that hits. And that would be lovely if that happened all the time with writers. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Sometimes you have to create that inspiration. But when that just hits, it feels like it flows and it feels very effortless. But there is a certain degree of difficulty and, having to come up with all of it yourself too. So I think it's, they're both difficult in different ways, and they're both really fun challenges in different ways.
I really like what you said about having playlists, because I know that music definitely felt like it was a part of the book. Like I can totally see that kind of it makes complete sense to me. So we actually had a question from the Writing Corner on Instagram, I think interesting. Who was the most complicated character to write for you in the book?
I think it was Claude. I think it was interesting writing this book from one perspective. With All the Bright Places and Holding Up the Universe, my most recent books before this, they were both dual, points of view. And writing from one perspective, even though I've done it before with previous books, it felt like this thing I'd never done before. And that alone was challenging. And just staying in Claude's frame of mind and her heart and her soul and her, and her mind, all of that, and in her voice too, and maintaining that voice, I think that was challenging. And Jeremiah for me was in a way easier to get to know. And I think that's true sometimes when you're writing personal stories, because you have to look inward. Even if there is that distance between you and the character, you still have to look at yourself, and you have to sort through what needs to be there and what doesn't. And so I think for me, that's a long way of saying it was Claude.
Claude, I find Claude such an interesting character because she has this tendency to, I don't even know what the word is for it, like catastrophize. Like she has these kind of moments where she's like, everyone hates me, this is terrible. Like the bit that I think you see it most clearly is right at the beginning when she essentially says to the reader, so my dad came in my room and told me he hates me and he hates my mum and he wishes that we were just gone and he'd never met us. And then she takes a minute and is like, okay, he didn't actually say that. You kind of get the sense of like that difference. But that is kind of something I think a lot of people do experience, where they know that they take the worst part of what someone said. And what I found really interesting about that relationship that you did between Maya and Claude is that you really felt like that communication was so important to those characters, because you'd seen how it could have been her downfall, and she became throughout the story sort of more and more able to understand that that was something that she did and that she needed to. And she even says kind of later on, if this had happened at, 2 weeks ago even, I would have assumed all of these awful things, but actually now I've kind of gone on that journey. Was that kind of one of the, I guess, character growth things you wanted for the character? Were you really conscious of wanting to go on an internal journey through what's quite a short space of time for the character?
Definitely. And thank you for putting it so beautifully. It's, that is something I think I've certainly, I can still do from time to time. I mean, if you get your feelings hurt and you hear the worst that someone is saying, and you have to back up and actually look at it and hear the thing that they're actually saying. And I think that's something, I definitely wanted Claude to learn. I mean, I don't fault her for it, but she is a bit dramatic, especially at the beginning. And, she's got a big imagination and she's got very tender feelings. And I certainly relate to that. And I did want that to be one of the things that she learns in this journey. I mean, for me, the book is so much, as I said, about building that floor beneath your feet. So it's about beginning, like, this is where I begin and this is where Claude begins. And part of that beginning for her is learning to talk about the things that she's going through, not keeping them hidden, and also learning to see them clearly for what they really are.
That makes a lot of sense. We have so many questions coming in on the chat, very exciting. So I'm going to try and pick out some ones that make sense for like what we're currently talking about. So I guess character is kind of where we've landed at the moment. So Heidi Dunbar asks, what do you think makes Claude and Maya's relationship unique? And then, love the book, by the way.
Yay, thank you so much, Heidi. I think what makes it unique is that for their age, I feel like they communicate more maturely than a lot of, certainly than I did when I was a teen and, had a boyfriend. And I think that they're more open with each other. I feel like, they kind of said to each other, okay, this is me and take it or leave it. And I feel like that to me is what I'm most proud of with them. I feel like, that is something that's rare and special. I think even like at my age, I think that's rare too, for people I know. And luckily my husband and I are very much like that. And we were like that the day we met. We're like, okay, here I am. I'm going to tell you everything. So you don't have to discover it in 6 months and be like, whoa. And that is something that I feel very proud of with them, because I feel like their communication and connection is really pure.
I think what really was exciting for me about that aspect of the book was that I do think it is true that there's this kind of maturity in both the characters, but it never at any point felt like it was adults in a teenage body, like being in a way that a teenager didn't speak. And I think partly it was because it was believable for those two specific characters to have that, like the fact that Maya had from an early age had to figure out being like acting older than he might have already been, and had already gone on that journey of like confronting the immature aspects of himself, or the self-destructive things he might have done in the past. And so he was kind of already out of that particular period in his life, which makes sense that someone would kind of have more of a mature perspective at that point. And yeah, that was really that was something that really stuck with me. I wrote down, well, I read it on Kindle, so I did that thing where I just highlighted a million things, and it's really fun because you can obviously see what other people have highlighted, and I'd go to highlight something and be like, 20 other people have highlighted this
amazing
quote that I enjoyed. But the line that he says, we're two people who didn't expect to meet each other but did probably years before we were supposed to, which is such an interesting line. Where did that idea come from? Was that something that is kind of like an experience you've had, or like a sort of philosophy around maybe not just romantic partnerships but friendships or relationships, or people you realize later that you could have learned from and you just met them too soon fully appreciate them?
I think it's, it's a combination. I feel like so much of love is timing, and that can be friendship love or romantic love. I feel like so much of it is when you meet each other and how ready you are for each other. My husband and I always say, like, we wish we'd met each other, 20 years ago, but we wouldn't have been the same people at that moment, and maybe not have realized how special or precious this is. So we may not have appreciated it as much. And so I think that there's something in that. And I was thinking about that with that relationship in my life and friendship relationships in my life, and thinking about the importance of timing and being ready for something. And I wanted to put in there something that kind of conveyed the fact that Claude and Maya, like, there is kind of this kindred spirit, soulmate, special connection between them that is rare. Um, but it's not necessarily realistic, maybe at this moment, that they could go get married and, end up together happily ever after. Not, there's no spoiler in that. Just saying, like, I just felt like I wanted to convey that specialness in that phrase. That was a way to do it.
We're going to take another question from the chat that's come in, which I'm going to pair with a question of my own, because you mentioned the idea of, this being a book that you wrote from one particular point of view. So my question is, why did you choose to only have her point of view and not his or, someone else's? And then the question to go with it from Esme Rose, who's watching, is, would you ever visit the story from a different perspective?
That's very interesting. My publisher actually really wanted me to try one from one perspective. And so that was the main, reason. And I think that at first I actually tried Claude's perspective and Jeremiah's perspective, but it didn't quite, even though it was fun to write in his voice, it didn't quite work. I mean, my wonderful editor at Random House was just suggesting, because it is such a personal story, and it really is Claude's story that I'm telling, because it's so based on my story, it should be one perspective. And so that's why I did that. But it was interesting doing that, because, as I said, I just come from these multiple points of view, and there's a comfort in doing that. It's a challenge, but I love writing the 2 points of view. And in terms of revisiting, and Esme, thank you for your question. I think it would be really interesting to write it from Maya's, but I would almost like to write the story. I wouldn't want to write the same story from his perspective. I'd like to write it before he meets Claude, or, after Breathless takes place.
I mean, I'd be up for that. So I think what I want to talk about now is actually probably the topic that we had the most questions from the Discord, okay, which was all about the way that you deal with sex and sexuality within the book. Because we had a lot of questions from people who were just kind of fascinated by how much of a focus there was on sex within this book that is YA, and how kind of unusual that sometimes might be, even in kind of this genre that often is quite boundary breaking. So I'm going to read you some questions from the lovely people from Discord. So from X Zenith, in Breathless, how explicit did you feel it was appropriate to go? Because the age rating is 14 plus, but it gets very detailed, shall we say, the way they've explained it.
Writing it was definitely a challenge. And I think that I keep going back to All the Bright Places in terms of, things I learned with that book that I could then take into this one. And one of the things I learned when writing All the Bright Places, in tackling something like mental health and suicide for teens, I felt this great responsibility, and I was very intimidated by it. And then I had to just tell myself, write as honestly as possible. And that's the same thing I tried to do with Breathless. I felt like I was not seeing a lot in YA that dealt with especially female sexuality in a really honest way. I've read some beautiful work about, assault, rape. I mean, and Speak by Laurie Hall Sanderson is one of my absolute favorite YA novels, and these important books about these issues that we need to read about. But I wanted to read something that was a positive kind of positive, life-affirming, empowering book that not with a focus on sex, but with that being a part of the story. And I know when I was growing up, Judy Blume's Forever was like such a sensation. And it was so honest about sex, and it was for teens. And that blew my mind that someone was like putting it out there and talking to us in a way we wanted to be talked to about issues that we were very much thinking about. And so I was looking for that kind of currently in a current book, and I couldn't find it. And I felt like I wanted to write something about that and have that be part of Claude's story. And for her, she feels like her voice is taken away and she has no power at first in the book. And this was one of the ways that she becomes, I guess she gets to use her voice and she gets to make her own decisions. It's kind of the start of that by deciding, okay, I'm going to sleep with this boy for the first time. This is my first time sleeping with anyone, and it's going to be him. And it was a way of kind of taking power for her. But again, I wanted to do it very responsibly because I know it's a delicate subject.
There was a question, kind of an observation that I really enjoyed from one reader at Quakewitch, who wrote, "It's so interesting how Claude academically knows that virginity is complete rubbish as a concept, but still fixates on it. It could easily be seen as her contradicting herself, which technically it is, but it's also incredibly realistic." So I kind of wondered if you could talk a bit on that, about that kind of idea of virginity, and that's could on the surface be seen as like, why is this book fixating on this thing, on we be on this? But actually, I think she's completely right that actually for a lot of people, you can acknowledge the fact that it on a social level, it's kind of a construct, but personally, you can still have a very specific relationship with sex and want your first time to go a particular way.
Absolutely. And I think that so many young people I know and have heard from just from all the bright places in Holy Nth Universe, these are things that they've touched on in letters to me and messages to me. And it's also something I know from the young people in my family and my life. And I think that, there is that intellectual understanding of like, it actually isn't anything. Virginity isn't anything, and it doesn't matter in the way that society has made it matter, especially for women. It's ridiculous. But it's also, for Claude, I think she was, she fixates on it in a way because she knows it's like a milestone and it's a momentous thing for her, at least personally, because it's something she wants to do, and she's, her burgeoning hormones and everything, but it's also something I think let me just stop to say it's interesting because I think even though we've come so far in society and we get that it's just this patriarchal kind of construct that's been forced on women, if you will, and people for a long, long time, it still means something to sleep with someone for the first time, especially if it is a good experience and a positive experience. And I think that for Claude, she can reject it intellectually and what that means, but emotionally, she's looking forward to that moment and wondering what it will be like. If that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. So Pippins asks, very interested in the editing and publishing process for a book like this. A lot of YA will have mentions of or just imply sex, but this pushes those limits. How much back and forth was there with the publishers for this to be in the YA category?
So interesting, and thank you for the question. My editor was actually, she's amazing, and she is editor, but she's also one of the publishers for the imprint. And she was from the beginning, she knew that I would be, very frank and, writing about it very honestly and maybe very vividly. And so she was like, I turned it in and I was nervous because I thought, oh my God, they're going to be like, okay, we've got to cut a lot of this, or we've got to soften it, or we've got to, fade to black, which is what happens a lot. And no, there wasn't anything like that from her. I had young readers. Some of my readers who've been with me since All the Bright Places who become friends. I had them read it. I wanted, young people to read it. I wanted, obviously, we had some sex experts read it. We wanted to have as many people, as many eyes on it as possible to make sure that we weren't just, like leading the charge and wanting to go out there with this book like it was. But so there was a lot of sensitivity and thought put into it. But I will say that, with all the care and the sensitivity and that my publisher gave to it, I never felt edited with it, which I'm still surprised by, because I'm still kind of waiting for them to go, you can't put that in there.
Amazing. So last question in this category, unless anyone in the chat has anything else to add, is from 20 something, which is kind of a similar question, but less about the people in publishing and more about people external to it. So they asked, did you ever worry there will be pushback from adults outside of publishing about the book's content? So many books that discuss teen sexuality in a realistic way face a lot of negativity from more conservative people. Were you concerned that this would happen to Breathless?
Definitely. And thank you again for the question. It's, at first, I think if I'd written this book years ago, I would have been so worried and so petrified, and probably I would not have been able to write it the way I did. But because of All the Bright Places, like I put All the Bright Places came out into the world, there was a lot of criticism at first from adults who said, I don't want my child reading this. I don't want my teen reading this. I don't think teens should be reading anything about depression or suicide. They can learn about that later. And at first I was like, I am a people pleaser and I don't like it when anyone's angry with me. And it was really hard. But then I started hearing from young readers who were just saying, thank you for talking about this, because no one's talking about it and they're not letting me talk about it, or I don't feel like I can talk about it and I feel very alone. And I became like that kind of like proverbial like mother lifting the car off the child. I was like, by the time I wrote Breathless, I was like, let them come, because I feel like what I've been hearing from teens for the past 6 years is we need to talk about X. We need to talk about Y. We need to talk about these things. And can you please talk about this or write a book about this? And so I welcome the discussions, let's put it that way, because I feel like with work that deals with controversial issues, especially for teens, you have to write as honestly and responsibly as you can. And once you do that, you can't do anything else except talk, engage, be involved in discussions. So that's what I'm doing.
Having read the book, obviously that makes total sense to me, because I think when you deal with issues, it's not just a sort of like, hey, and we're going to splash an issue in there just for funsies. It kind of always feels like it's part of the character and the story and the theming and other stuff that's happening at the same time. It won't just be one note of the story. It feels like really, I don't know if holistic's the right word, but kind of very much like all ties together in the end. So yeah, that makes.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
So we've actually had quite a few questions from the chat around your kind of writing journey. And so I'm going to ask a few of those now. So we have a question, this kind of same or similar question has come from both Georgia Taylor and also Bex. So they basically want to know, when did you start writing, or, what inspired you to start writing in the first place?
Well, I thank you, Georgia and Bex, for this. I was a little girl when I started writing. My mother was also a writer, and if she, had any hope of having writing time to herself, she incorporated it so that I would write and she would write. And once she found out that I loved storytelling, she really encouraged me. And it's the thing since I was younger, that I've always loved doing the best. And whether it's telling stories or writing them down. So she was really very influential in that, even though she wanted me to be whatever I wanted to be in the world, and just happened to be a writer. And professionally, I started writing 20 years ago. And my first book was nonfiction. It was about an Arctic expedition from 19 13. That seems like a whole lifetime ago. And and from there I wrote another nonfiction book. And from there I wrote a series of adult novels. And from there, it wasn't until I lost my wonderful agent of 15 years, kind of suddenly, unexpectedly. And I had to reinvent myself in a way. I had to talk to new agents, tell them what I was working on. And I kept thinking about his last words to me, which were, whatever you write next, I want you to write it even if it terrifies you. And I knew what that was. It was the story of a boy I once loved and lost to suicide. And so I wrote All the Bright Places, not just to honor that boy, but to honor my agent, and kind of started my career over with All the Bright Places.
Amazing. We have another question which a few people have asked. So both Ali K and Savannah Franks have both asked, what advice would you give to young people wishing to pursue writing themselves?
Oh my gosh, thank you, Ali K and Savannah. I would say a couple of things. One, always believe in yourself and in your work. There are, as my mom used to say, enough people in this world who will tell you no, so don't be one of them. And write the story you want to read. I think that, every book I've written is a book I really wanted to read. And that helps keep you invested in it, especially in the long hours where you're like, don't know what you're doing. You feel like, why did I even start this project? And always to just remember that you're the only you there is in this entire world, which means that only you can write the stories you can write. And I think that's really powerful when you really think about it. Also, I have tips for publishing and writing on my website. So it's jenniferniven.com. There's a page for writers that has a lot of resources.
Amazing. I guess like now that kind of having seen that question and heard your answer, I am fascinated to know what you think about the teacher at the very start of the story who and kind of what he says to Claude, like whether you like how did you come up? Is that something that you feel like is kind of like came from people doubting you and your writing? Is that stuff you've heard before? Like where did that come from, and what do you think about that as a piece of feedback to a student?
I think that, I actually think it was meant well. I think he meant it well. It was something that he was trying to be constructive, I think, because he felt like she had potential and he wanted to help her. It's definitely something I've heard before. So the teacher says to Claude, I know you want to be a writer, but it's until you can really dig in and feel something emotionally and convey it on the page, it's going to, it's not going to be as good as you want it to be and as it can be. And I remember when I went to the American Film Institute to study screenwriting, and I got my master's in screenwriting, and it was a fantastic program. But I remember sitting in my screenwriting class, and my fellow screenwriters, one of the criticisms they gave to my work and to me was they felt like they were all pouring themselves onto the page and like opening their hearts and like bleeding onto the page, as Hemingway says. And I was writing like, a happy rom-com about, whatever. And they said, we just worry that you can't put yourself on the page in the deep emotional way that you need to. And I always remembered that. And then with All the Bright Places, I think that was really the first book that really proved that I could do that.
Amazing. We have a follow-up question from Lucy, who asks, what advice do you have for aspiring writers who are afraid of pursuing it as a career?
Thank you, Lucy. I think, I know so many really talented, brilliant writers who are paralyzed by the fear of putting their work out there. And I think that fear is just very, very normal. I mean, it's hard to write for yourself or write by yourself and then share it with other people. So I think if it is something that you want to pursue for a career, and there's nothing that says you have to, but if it's your dream, I would say, start with trusting someone giving it to someone you really trust, sharing the work with just one person who you just trust implicitly. So it's no one who's going to just, lead with criticism, someone who's going to tell you all the really good things about it and also tell you the things they think could be stronger, or, give you that kind of feedback. I think that is so helpful. And just sitting down to actually do the work can be very scary. My mom used to teach writing, and one of the things she used to do was take a blank sheet of paper and just crumple it up and throw it away. And then that was just to kind of symbolize you have control over that piece of paper and anything that goes on it. It's just a piece of paper, or it's just a laptop, or it's just a computer screen. And so just remembering that you control what goes on that screen. And if you don't show up to do that writing, nothing will get written. So I feel like you have stories to tell and you need to tell them. And I just hope that one day I'll get to read one.
Amazing. So we have a question from Georgia, which we've kind of heard, I think, a little bit of this from you about, the playlists and imagining, actors or actresses kind of linked to the character really helped you. But they want to know, what is your process behind creating your characters? Love to hear a bit about that.
Thank you, Georgia. I think one of the things that, I definitely do is creating the playlist. For me, the playlist, I can create those even when I just have a very slim idea of the character. And as I create it, it helps me get to know them better, if that makes sense. Like just making that playlist, it's almost like a storyboard to the character. And it's great, especially if you're writing dual perspectives, you can listen to someone, listen to Finch's music, and then you can listen to Violet's music, and it's very different, and it drops you kind of emotionally into the story. I also, just make up character sketches. I cast my characters, and all of that kind of goes hand in hand with really getting to know the characters inside and out, which is something I feel like I have to do before I start writing. I'm not necessarily one of those plotters who plots out every single beat of a story, but I definitely get to know my characters as well as I can before I start the writing, because if I know the characters inside and out, then I feel like I know what they would do in any situation as I go. And really, I can't say it enough, the key for me is the playlist. It's just, maybe one song pops into my head. For me with Finch, it was I Got You by Split Enz. That was the first song for some reason. And when I didn't know Finch very well, I just kept adding songs to the list, and like one song led to another. And I was like, oh, if he likes that, he might like that. And it showed me all these different sides of him.
Amazing. We have a couple of questions that are potentially for people who you were kind of saying about loving to maybe pick up one of their books in a bookshop one day, who seem a little bit further on in the process, which is really exciting. So another Savannah, we got at least 2 Savannahs in the chat today, says, do you have any advice or tips for people about to start querying after finishing their manuscript? For example, do you recommend hiring an editor to have a look over it before you approach agents?
I would say, first of all, congratulations, Savannah. That is so exciting. For me, like I edit like crazy. So even though I don't love editing, but I am good at it. So I tend to edit my own work until I cannot think of a single thing to do to it anymore. And once I get to that point, I give it to a very trusted reader. And for me, it was always my mother. And she, of course, was a writer too. So she would be my first editor. And if there's someone like that in your life, that's amazing. If there is not, yes, hiring an editor, but one that really, who is really, really good, who you just, because I think there are a lot of editors out there who just want the money, honestly. And if Savannah, if you're at that point, I can actually recommend someone absolutely brilliant to you. So you can DM me if you want, and I will, or email me at jennifer@jenniferniven.com, and I will give you her name. But that can be a really good thing to do. And in terms of querying, for me, what I did, like first time around before, like when I began my career, 20 years ago, I looked at acknowledgments in people's books of books that were similar to mine in terms of genre or subject matter, and then looked at the acknowledgments because the authors always thank their agents. and then looked at those agents. And that's how I found my first agent. And that's how I found my second agent after my first agent died. So there are also, I have a lot of, as I said, resources on my website, jenniferniven.com. And there are resources about querying and finding agents as well. But I just wish you so much luck. And again, if you want to contact me, I can give you a name of a wonderful editor.
Amazing. Just a quick note to everyone who is currently watching, we are going to be entering spoiler territory pretty soon. So if you have any more questions that you would like to ask before that, make sure to get them in the chat just so you don't miss them. If we knew to, we can always, if you have a late question and we're in the middle of spoiler chat, we can totally go back to a non-spoilery question. Don't panic too much, but definitely thinking of all the questions you want to ask and get them in the chat so you don't miss your chance. So next question is from Wendy, who asks, what do you like to do when you're not writing or when you have a writer's block?
When I am not writing, let's see, I like to, thank you, Wendy. I like to go hiking. I love to, when we can, be outdoors and go exploring, go wandering like Violet and Finch, or like Claude and Maya in Breathless. My husband and I actually, we divide our time between LA and South Coastal Georgia, so opposite coasts. We have not been back to LA since March 1st of last year because of the pandemic. So we've been exploring Georgia, which I don't know as well. And we live about 15 minutes by water from the island where Claude and Maya are in the book. So we have a small boat and we just take the boat over and we go hunting for shark teeth like they did. We just go to the beach and build a shelter and I read or write. We do things with our kids. We play outside. I rescue cats. We have 7 rescue cats. And that's, so I take care of all the animals I can. And just, before the pandemic, spend time with friends, but now it's more spending time on the computer with friends and really making time for loved ones. And in terms of writer's block, for me, I listen to playlists. I also do a playlist of the entire story, an entire book that I'm writing. So in addition to the character playlists, and for me, if I'm blocked or just not feeling inspired, I can go hiking or walking and listen to that playlist, and inevitably something kind of clicks and I'm like, oh, I see this scene, or, oh, this could be really cool. So I do that.
Amazing. We have a question from Lucy. How do you go about writing a second draft? I'm excited about it, but I don't even know how to start.
Second draft, let's see, I usually, with the first draft, as I said, I get to the point where I absolutely have nothing left to add to it. And one of the actually last things I do with each draft, no matter which number it is to read it out loud, because you hear things that you don't see on the page. And sometimes that makes me change words, find other word choices, etc. So with the first draft, when I get to that point where I have no more to do with it, I give it to trusted readers and then I get their edits. And so I take a break if I can, deadline allowing, between first and second drafts so that I can clear my head and take a breath and come back to the second draft a little more refreshed, because otherwise it's just, you're so in it from the first draft that it's hard to have perspective. And then hopefully I had those notes from other people. I'm refreshed and I go back in. I take the notes that I, believe in and think are great and will make the project stronger. And I don't take the ones that I don't think will work. And then I just start at the beginning. I usually go through, I do all the notes from everyone, and then I go back through and do my own notes and kind of read it with everyone's new notes in there. And it's always exciting to me because by the time I take a little break, I'm ready to go back to it. So maybe just take a little break away from it and then go into it.
Amazing. Quick question from Esme. What song or songs inspired Claude?
Esme, thank you. There's a song, Absolute Beginners by Carla Bruni, which is just, I think that was the first song that really inspired Claude. It's just the words are perfect and it's lovely. And there's I'm trying to think of the other ones. I have this very lengthy playlist for Claude, but I do have a Spotify playlist for her as well. And I'm trying to think some of the other songs on it. That was the first one though. That was the first one. And anything French. Claude loves French music, especially from like the 60s, the 1960s. There was this movement called the Yeah Yeah Girls, and it's quite groovy and fun. And she and her best friend Saz like always listen to this music. Um, and that's like her main, anything French, anything like that reminds me of Claude instantly. But definitely that song, Absolute Beginners.
Amazing. So I have a question before we get onto spoilers. So this will be the last question before we can start talking spoilers. You kind of mentioned the fact that you've kind of been stuck in one place since March of last year. And this is something we've actually talked about with a few different authors on these streams over the last year. What do you think is going to happen with YA and writing and stuff in regards to the pandemic? Because it's obviously such a huge part of so many teenagers' lives now. And for a lot of young people, like proportionately has been a higher percentage of their life than people who are older that they have experienced being in this situation. Do you feel like there's going to be more of a push, or are you feeling more of a push to, when you're writing now, to include something like this in there? Or are you kind of writing from a nebulous ever 2019 sort of place, like it's not dealing with it at all? What are your thoughts about it? Have you kind of been thinking about that stuff as you write now?
That's a great question. And I think for me, at least, I don't really want to watch anything about the pandemic because I've lived in the pandemic and we're still living through the pandemic. So for me, I don't want to see people in quarantine. I don't want to read about people in quarantine. I want to read about life the way it was and the way hopefully it will go back to being. And, that is what I'm doing now. I'm working on a couple of projects now, and it's something I've definitely thought about and considered and talked to my editor about and talked to my agent about, and my friends who are YA authors. And I think, at least in our group, we kind of all agree that we just really want to think about the world as it was. And again, the way that we hope it will be again, because we've been living it and we want to not live it right now, at least in the things we're reading or watching.
That's very fair. Okay, this is everyone's warning. We're going into spoiler territory. If I had the technical capabilities, I would put some flashing images here. It would be very dramatic. There'd be sirens going off. So yeah, if you have not quite finished the book yet, please pause now and come back to the video later so you don't get spoiled for anything. So, right, the first is from Levi. This is one of those ones that could have gone in the inspiration question segment, but I was like, you know what, maybe just too much of a spoiler for the ending, so we're going to go with it in this section. In the past, you've primarily written YA books about mental health, both of which I absolutely adored, might I add. Representation is so important. So what inspired you to suddenly write a story more about heartbreak?
Thank you, Levi, for the question and those words. I think just for me, it was writing kind of that story from my summer when I was 18. Not, every detail, of course. I mean, there are a lot of differences, but for me, it was a summer of heartbreak. It was a summer of heartbreak, but it was also a summer of rebuilding a floor, building a new floor and beginning. And that's what I wanted it to be about. And I just felt like, as I was writing, I thought about different endings for Claude and Maya, but for me, that just was the one that felt right. And I felt like it was just right for both of them. So it was very much of the moment, but also it was deliberate in the sense that it's kind of the feel I had of that summer.
That makes sense. That was actually going to be one of my questions. Like, what were the other endings that you were contemplating? Was it ever going to be totally happy, skipping into the sunset, go together to New York, or was it always some version of a bittersweet ending?
I think it was always some version of a bittersweet ending, but there was one of like, maybe he would come see her, or, maybe something would happen to him. I mean, it's just the kind of the gamut of things. But yeah, and I also will say I kind of like those open-ended, endings where you kind of decide for yourself what's going to happen down the road. And I've had a lot of readers, ask me what's going to happen with Claude and Maya. Do they get together, down the road? To what happens? And I just always say, well, what do you think? And then they tell me, and it's like some wonderful, way to see the future with Claude and Maya. And I'm like, that's what happens. It's whatever you think is going to happen.
I think it's, part of what was really kind of felt almost weirdly nostalgic in a way about the story was the fact that they were in this space where they couldn't use modern communication, like just text each other or like send each other a quick DM about stuff. Like it very much kind of had more of those feels of those older romances, which I guess fits in a lot with Claude's interest and her kind of inspiration, especially with that haircut. And so I totally kind of feel like there is a possibility of actually they both have each other on Instagram or on Snapchat or whatever they're using, so that years down the line they can reconnect it way easier than they might have been able to in like another time, that actually that kind of could feel like a much more realistic thing to happen than it might have otherwise. We had a few people asking sequel ? But I feel like this maybe answers it, that it kind of having this ambiguous ending or an ending where you can kind of fill it in is the vibe, rather than necessarily solidifying it with a sequel.
Definitely. And thank you for that. But I will say, it is being made into a movie, so that will, in a way, be a sequel.
Amazing. We've honestly really picked some great books for this, like, because we picked a lot of the books for the book club like far in advance, and so many of them are now getting adaptations, and I'm like, I'm not saying that we did this, but we definitely
I think you did. I take credit for it. Thank you for it.
Can we ask how far that is in? Is it still in that stage of like, I can say nothing about this other than
exactly. Unfortunately, it is that stage, but it's exciting.
We're kind of talking, because I think all of the books that are getting adaptations from the book club have kind of are in that stage, which means that we're aware of the fact that in a few years' time we're going to be able to do like movie nights together, like virtual movie nights of all of these new TV shows that are going to be coming out.
Movie club.
It's changing. We're going to do a book club to movie club kind of way. Okay, here's something I need to tell you. I, before reading this book, did not think that 12 boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese could make me cry, and yet it happened. There were just these really beautiful little moments, or these little callbacks and things like that, and I knew, like, as soon as an author does the thing where they have a character react before they tell the audience what they're reacting to, like when she opens that box and she like starts rummaging through the paper, and then she's like, no, and like all her emotions come flooding in, and all the thoughts about her dad that have been like pent up with anger are suddenly starting to like shift and change and get more complex, and then you reveal that it's this mac and cheese, which has been this sort of element of their relationship from the very beginning, and these mentions of him, what he does for the family and how he shows his love through cooking for them. How, as a writer, do you get those things into the story? Is that something where you know that you want an emotional moment at the end, and then you kind of plant those clues in like a second or third draft, or does it go the other way around, that you start creating these characters and suddenly you realize, oh, there's actually a kind of poignant moment that could come later, linked to this bit of small characterization that I've added at the start?
I think both happen. I think that, sometimes you don't know that a specific thing that you've kind of mentioned before or set up before is going to come back, or could come back to evoke some sort of emotion. When that happens, you're like, oh, I'm a genius, even though you didn't plan it. But with the macaroni and cheese specifically, I knew that was going to be some sort of thing, because my dad was, I loved him so much, but we also, kind of had that Claude and her dad relationship in a way, for at least when I was younger. And he was very much like a gourmet chef in his spare time. And he was like, oh, craft macaroni and cheese. And so when I asked for macaroni and cheese, he would like make it from scratch, which is, now I sound horrible to be complaining about that. But as a teen, I was like, oh, I want craft. And my dad, as this like concession to me years later, when I was like an adult, I went to visit him at his home, and he made like this big gourmet meal, and he made like boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese and brought it out in this enormous bowl. And I knew like that was a lot for him to do, because he just did not believe in that being on his table, but he was going to make it for me because he loved me, and he had a hard time actually saying those words, so he could show me that way. So for me, I knew that that was a good moment, because I wanted a moment like that with Claude and her dad, where he could kind of break through all of her anger and her defenses and do something really, loving for her, that if you describe it, doesn't really sound, but it is part of their relationship. So that was more deliberate, but sometimes it's just not planned. It just is luck, I think.
Amazing. I kind of want to, there was a moment so the way that we do the chat about the books on Discord is that you have the ability to like cover spoilers, so that anyone can comment at any point and they just say like, oh, I'm on page 270, and then they'll just like hide the stuff that's a spoiler. And when people got to the bit where Claude essentially cheats on Maya in this moment of like emotional devastation, everyone was like, no, stop it. In part because it's kind of like, that she is literally dealing with the exact same thing from her parents' point of view, that she kind of has this element, and she's, he's been the one who's been really open about the idea that he like deliberately kind of self-sabotages and ruins things that are going good for him, and kind of is more aware of that. And this kind of feels like maybe one of the first times that she's had the kind of emotional devastation that would make her act like that she's maybe not actually fully aware that that's a way that she might react to something, because it's not quite happened in the same way before. What the inclusion of that, like, where did it come from? What was your kind of
why? Like, why?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think completely makes sense with the character, but it was really interesting to see that was kind of the self-destructive thing that she decided, or decide's a strong word, because she did decide to do it, but it also was just so while it was happening, she almost didn't quite know why she was doing it.
I think, and you said it so well about just not realizing, she doesn't have the kind of self-reflection that Jeremiah has at this point, because he's done that. That's been a pattern for him all of his life. But for Claude, this really is like the first time this summer doing those kinds of things. And when I was writing it, I was like, oh, no, Claude, don't. It's one of those things that you write as an author and you're like, I don't want this to happen. Like, I don't want this to happen. But it had to happen. It was just something I think Claude would have done in that moment. She just wasn't thinking, and she was just kind of just grasping for anything that kind of grounded her and made her feel like she was there and, present. And she was just reeling from what she learns about her dad later on. So it was interesting, like writing it, I was just like, oh, I don't want to do it. Don't want her to do that. And I was kind of going, no, the whole time I was writing it. So
I'm glad that we were all having similar emotions during that whole.
Yes, I joined you with, yes.
We have a spoilery question from Esme Rose. Do you think Claude would return to the island after the events of the book?
Esme Rose, I think that she would. I like to think that she goes back, maybe not right away. I think that Claude thinks she'll go back sooner than she does, but I think that she gets very caught up in her life, in college and new friends and relationships and everything. But I like to think that maybe right after college, she goes back and visits and sees it again through a whole new, completely different eyes.
We are so close to the end now. Oh my gosh, it's absolutely flown by. We're
amazing.
we're gonna try and get in a couple of questions. First of all, a couple of people have put comments rather than questions, but I just wanted to read them. So Wendy says, I just wanted to say that your books really changed my life in a positive way. I'm so thankful for them. And Esme Rose said, the bit where she cheated, I screamed, but I loved the book because it felt so real.
Oh my goodness, thank you both. That's amazing.
You know what, we're going to end with this question from Heidi Dunbar because I think it's a really interesting one. She wanted you to talk a little bit about the meaning or different meanings behind the title Breathless, why it got chosen, what it kind of links into in various points in the novel.
Thank you, Heidi Dunbar. It's the title for me, it means so many things, and it's why I like that word for this book. First and foremost, I think Claude is so breathless when she feels like the floor disappears beneath her feet and she doesn't have like anything to stand on. And then there's that feeling of, that feeling kind of lingers throughout the summer as she's trying to find her footing again. And then there's the breathless feeling of this new romance and this boy and sex for the first time. And that is such a breathless feeling. And there's the breathless feeling of, she's a writer and she wants to be a writer and she can't find the words and she's not able to write for a while, but then the writing comes and there's this feeling, as all of you writers know, like when you're writing and it's flowing and there's a real parallel with life there too, it just leaves you breathless in like the best way. And so I love all the different meanings for Claude personally. And then there's this nod to a black and white film by Jean-Luc Godard called Breathless. And that is the film that Claude watches in the book. I don't name it in the book, but it's the film that she watches that inspires her to cut her hair like Jean Seberg, the star. So I liked that little Easter egg too.
Amazing. I really enjoyed that. It's a book that is a kind of about love and about romance and things like that, but there's also all these other parts of her, like you said, like her being a writer. The entire time together, they know that it's limited, but she's still going to say to him, like, I need to write right now, like I'm having this moment of like creativity for me, and I know that we only have so much time, but this morning I'm gonna write. He's, yep, you know what, chill, cool, we'll just be together in the same space, but I'm not going to take up your kind of time and energy. And knowing that she also needs to be with her mom at the same time and that she might go to the museum with her for a bit, like it was a nice way of having a kind of a romantic story and a romance story that didn't feel like it was kind of overwhelmingly just about two people who cut out anything else from their life. You were always wanting to have a progression of her relationship with her mum and her dad and her friend and her own dreams and hopes before college and all that kind of stuff. So I know that was something that people really appreciated while they were reading, especially because we had a lot of people who either hadn't read a YA romance before or, they were really, really new to the genre and didn't know what to expect. So I think that was something that they all really appreciated.
Oh, good. Oh, thank you.
Amazing. So thank you very much, Jennifer, for answering all your questions. We got through as many of them as we could. There were so many of them on the chat. Thank you everyone for watching, because you all had incredible questions, incredible insights into the book. And it's just been so fun chatting with you for the last hour.
It's been wonderful. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate it and appreciate all of your questions and appreciate you reading the book. It means everything to me.
Incredible. So the only thing I've left to say to everyone who's watching is our book for next month, for February, is Are You Watching?, which is a YA thriller from Vincent Rolfe. So on the last Tuesday of February, we are going to, at the exact same time as 7:00 on this channel, we are going to be talking to him. So again, in the description is information about how to get involved in the book club, the Discord you can join, things like that. So we can all read that one together next month. So I think that is all there is to say now. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining.